Knowing his father was engaged in a major family row would have been upsetting for any student trying to settle quietly into a new university in a new part of the country, surrounded by strangers. How much more devastating then to have it splashed all over the newspapers. The first few weeks and months were tough, but he gradually found his feet and began to make friends. Inevitably, perhaps, he gravitated to the familiar and the safe. The only two old Etonians in his hall of residence, Alastair Coutts Wood and Fergus Boyd. He had known them vaguely at Eton, and Andrew Gailey had done a little engineering to ensure that there were at least a couple of familiar faces in hall with whom he thought William might become friends. William was cautious about letting people into his confidence, perhaps rightly. At Ludgrove and Eton he had been protected by the system, and he was among children who came from solid middle and upper-class backgrounds, not known for their anarchic or republican sympathies. At university there were no safety nets, and he was amongst a student population of nearly 7,000 very diverse people from every background under the sun and almost as many countries. There was no presumption that they would be sympathetic to him, and no reason to suppose they might be supporters of the monarchy. Many of them, some of the lecturers included, were not. Equally, there were people who threw themselves at him, particularly star-struck American girls, whom he steered clear of. As his father discovered at the same age, those that came forward usually wanted to be friends for all the wrong reasons, while the more genuine people didn't want to be seen to be sucking up. There was also the very real fear of photographs or stories and snippets being sold to the media. He knew he could trust the sort of people he mixed with at school and at home. Sticking with them was a safer bet. There was no shortage of people to choose from. The university struggles to shake off its public school image, and the student profile is mixed nationally. About 1/3 are Scottish, 1/3 European, including English, and 1/3 from further overseas, mostly America. But in William's year there were dozens of boys from Eton. They can appear to be terribly posh, says David. Most of them go home for the weekends, but put them all in a minibus together with the others for a week on a field trip and they all get on famously. St. Andrews is an incredibly inclusive place. William did mix with the state school students in academic and sporting settings. It was almost a thing that William was determined to do, says David. His very close friends were all from public schools. Interestingly though, he started playing very early for the university water polo team. Water polo is not a particularly public school sport. It is one of the roughest games you can play. It can be brutal. And he was playing in the Scottish League and the Celtic Nations tournament, so he was going to places like Motherwell, a relatively depressed former steel town southeast of Glasgow, which is an utterly no-nonsense place. In his bathing cap they didn't know who he was. The hall of residence he chose was called St. Salvator's Hall, commonly known as Sally's, which is one of the smallest and most central, where Kate Middleton also happened to be living that first year, which is how they came to meet. Most early friendships are formed with the people you live with at university, quite simply because you bump into each other all the time, in the corridors and bathrooms, over breakfast in the coffee machine, and clutching armfuls of dirty socks in the laundry room. William had missed Freshers' Week, when there are parties and discos and time for the new intake to work out the geography of the town and make a few friends before the work starts in earnest. In his absence, the public school element in Sally's had already sought each other out, and Kate, with her Marlborough College credentials, her fashionable clothes and her well-kempt mane of dark brown hair, was one of them. They met with friends, and then found themselves attending the same lectures, walking to and from Sally's, bumping into each other at the sports center, in bars and around the town. It's not a big place, there are just 3 main streets, and people with anything in common tend to gravitate to one another. Sally's was purpose-built in the 1930s, out of the ubiquitous grey stone that is so characteristic of the town, with spacious gardens at the back. William had made it very clear that he didn't want anything fancy, so he had a standard room to himself but shared a bathroom. He also shared laundry and kitchen facilities, although most meals during the week were provided. At weekends they had to fend for themselves in the evenings, but there were plenty of bars, pubs and restaurants serving food, or there was the chippy. The only difference between him and every other student in Sally's was that his PPOs had a room nearby. Some of the protection people came the year before William arrived and said, "We need to see the rooms," says David. So, because I'm not supposed to be telling anybody anything, I had to say to the manager of St. Salvator's, "Look, when is the present student who occupies that room likely to be out? She's never in between 9 and 11 in the morning," she says, "so I took these burly policemen, about 11 of them, up to this room. It was empty, the manager unlocked it, we all stood in the room, they all chatted away. There was then a wonderful pitter-patter along the corridor of a naked student except for a bath towel coming back to her room to get dressed. She handled the police a lot better than the police handled her." The protection people were a scream. They dressed like 70s middle-class students, in cords and jackets. They stood out a mile trying to blend in and look like students. The university wanted no guns on campus. "I don't know what they actually did," says David. "But everyone in the town used to refer casually to a certain vehicle which regularly toured the streets neighboring the campus as the gun van." David and William met every 3 or 4 weeks. Our meetings were not really businesslike because he was incredibly jovial. It was very knockabout, and that was the level at which he wanted it, and not, perhaps, the level he expected from a university. I think he had this notion he was in a different hierarchy and it went up to people like me and it would be as formal as some of his other hierarchies were, and he enjoyed the fact that it wasn't like that. The fact that someone would say, "Ah, come off it." So we got on extremely well, but it was not beyond the superficial in terms of personal things. David was much amused by a conversation with the Queen during her Golden Jubilee at Buckingham Palace. He was sent as a representative of one of the 6 ancient universities to swear allegiance and say we were loyal citizens, he says, and I remember the Queen asking me, "How's William?" As if I saw him every day, as if St. Andrews was one quad. I said, "As far as I know, he's absolutely fine."